are about 215,000 state workers employed by California. A little more than half of them work for the state's 5 largest departments, with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation being the largest. Most state workers, about 85%, are rank-and-file employees, and we establish their compensation through the collective bargaining process. The collective bargaining process is a negotiation process between the governor and state employees. Through this process, the governor is represented by the Department of Human Resources, and the employees are organized into 21 bargaining units who are represented by unions at the bargaining table. The product of these negotiations is a contract known as a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, that must be ratified by the legislature. The remaining 15% of the state workforce is excluded from the collective bargaining process and consists mostly of managers and supervisors. For these employees, the governor has pretty broad authority to establish their compensation levels pending legislative appropriation. The governor's January budget plan proposes that the state spend about $24 billion for state worker salaries and benefits. This is an increase from the prior year largely because the governor proposes to give most state workers a pay increase. The costs of health benefits and pension benefits are increasing, and the governor proposes to increase the number of state workers by about 1,600 positions. For reasons that we cite in our report, we think that the state's cost for employee compensation will exceed that which is proposed in the governor's budget. For the biggest reason for this increase will be due to decisions that were made by the CalPERS board after the governor introduced his January proposal. Although I'll be talking about the state's employee compensation costs in 2014-15, our report goes into more detail on the state's costs over the past 20 years. In particular, what we find is that the state's costs on a per employee basis have increased over the past 20 years and in particular the past 10 years, while the state's employees' take-home pay has been largely flat over the same period when you're controlling for inflation. For the typical state worker, salary is the largest component of his or her compensation, accounting for about 2/3 of the state's employee compensation costs. In 2014-15, the governor proposes that the state spend about $16 billion on state workers' salaries. This is an increase from the prior year because the governor proposes to give most state workers a general salary increase. This is significant because this is the first general salary increase for most state workers in about 7 years. Some state workers are not proposed to receive a pay increase because either they have an expired MOU or because their current MOU does not require a pay increase in 14-15. In addition to salary, state workers receive non-salary benefits as part of their compensation. In 2014-15, the governor proposes that the state spend about $8 billion towards these non-salary benefits. This comprises about 48% of employees' salary costs. Of the non-salary benefits, pension and health benefits comprise the majority of the costs that the state pays. As we explain in our report, pension and health care costs have been increasing over the past few years, largely due to pension unfunded liabilities and health premiums increasing at a rate exceeding inflation. The governor proposes to increase positions in some departments while decreasing or eliminating positions in other departments. On net, he proposes increasing the state workforce by about 1,600 positions. We estimate that roughly $170 million of the governor's proposed 2014-15 budget is attributable to these new positions. In our report, we highlight some of these departments to have significant growth or reductions in positions under the governor's proposal. The CalPERS board approved new actuarial assumptions at its February 18, 2014 meeting. Under these new assumptions, CalPERS assumes that retirees live longer when calculating the amount of money necessary to be contributed to the CalPERS pension fund each year. Under these new calculations, we estimate that the state's costs in 2014-15 will be about $430 million more than the governor proposes in his budget. As we note in our report, these costs will increase each year over the next 3 years until the effect of this assumption change is fully implemented.